Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. It is 2021!
Happy New Year, Happy New Year. May we all have a vision now and then.
And we were all hoping that dumping 2020 faster than a jackrabbit with a divorce would mean better times ahead, that the pandemic would subsist, that we would get some return to some sort of normality. Heck, maybe even some of the graft and corruption that we saw on election day would finally be rooted out. That maybe people would actually start paying attention to the real problems our society and country faces. But we're only a few days into this new year, and it already looks like our hopes were grossly misplaced. And one prime example that shows this is New York State. The right has lambasted New York State since last spring, and rightfully so. For example, Governor Andrew Cuomo, as of December 12, 2020, is himself responsible for the deaths of 7,602 senior New Yorkers. Why? Because on March 25th, he decreed that nursing homes couldn't test people that hospitals were sending them for China's coronavirus. An order that wasn't backtracked until the second weekend in May, meaning that for over a month, people with the virus were being shoved like sardines into New York nursing homes where it spread like wildfire. Even though we knew back in March that China's virus attacked the elderly more aggressively and that the elderly had a better chance of dying from China's creation than younger people. But hey, most of them were probably white anyway, so you know, it's okay that they died because social justice. While the governor was busy slaughtering senior citizens, restaurants, bars, movie theaters, gyms, small businesses of every stripe were locked down tighter than Scrooge's purse strings, and people were even discouraged from going out and getting a little fresh air and sunshine. But these strict protocols, they were only for the pay-ons. If you fell into the right intersectional categories or knew the right people, the rules didn't apply to you. For example, last summer in New York City, a rally of 15,000 people gathered to support quote-unquote black trans lives, none of whom were practicing social distancing. But all the health experts quickly reassured everyone that no, those types of rallies were okay because systematic racism and homophobia and transphobia were even greater public health risks than the coronavirus. These decrees also don't mean anything to you if you're in with the right people. For example, on November 11th, Governor Cuomo issued more lockdown decrees, limiting social and public gatherings to 10 people max. But this didn't stop friends of Carlos Caesarea, president and CEO of the New York Building Congress and a local mover and shaker, from throwing him a surprise birthday bash on November 14th that directly flew in the face of those public health ordinances of the 11th. Quote, "But photos of Caesarea's party show far more than 10 people in attendance, including Deputy Brooklyn Borough President Ingrid Lewis-Martin and former Brooklyn Democratic Party Chairman Frank Zeddio. Moreover, most celebrants neither wore masks nor maintained their distance from others." That's the good old two-tiered system for ya. And believe it or not, gang, things are about to get even worse. Because right now, as of this recording, as we speak right now, the New York State Assembly is considering in committee a bill, Bill A416, which, if passed and signed by the governor, would give the state government of New York the power to detain and remove from public life people whom it considers to be a public health threat. This is in part what the bill says, quote, "Upon determining by clear and convincing evidence that the health of others is or may be endangered by a case, contact, or carrier, or suspected case, contact, or carrier of a contagious disease that, in the opinion of the governor, after consultation with the commissioner, may pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health resulting in severe morbidity or high mortality, the governor or his or her delegee, including but not limited to the commissioner or the heads of local health departments, may order the removal and or detention of such a person or of a group of such persons by issuing a single order, identifying such persons either by name or by a reasonable specific description of the individual or group being detained. Such person or group of persons shall be detained in a medical facility or other appropriate facility or premises designated by the governor or his or her delegee in complying with subdivision 5 of this section." The bill tries to reassure us by saying that no one would be detained more than 3 business days, and that if the governor, his delegee, or whatever powers that be believe that more time is needed, then they have to go to the courts to get an extension. But just from reading the bill, my gut instinct says that the courts are going to be called in a lot to extend the detainment period of the poor saps who are removed from public life by this bill. And that's because Bill A416 also says that no one shall be released from this detainment until the governor and the powers that be determine that the said person is either no longer contagious, was never infected with the disease and was never contagious to begin with, or no longer presents a public health risk to others. Now, let's be brutally honest here, gang. No beating about the bush. No use of the tired old cliches that this bill is worrisome, this is disturbing, this bill is stupid. No. Let's dispense with all that malarkey for just a second, and let's come out right in the open and say what needs to be said. This bill is tyrannical on its face. And the reason why this bill is tyrannical is because it is a slap in the face to the Constitution. The 5th and the 14th Amendments say, black and white, clear as crystal, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, i.e. outside of the normal judicial procedures. This means that governors, legislators, the powers that be, public servants, remember that, public servants, can't simply decide that an individual or a group of people is a threat to them, throw them in jail, declare their guilt, and then proceed to punish them. Nor can they create a law specifically designed to erase their competition or impediments to their agenda, regardless of what form those impediments take. But this is exactly what A416 does. It is the assumption that you're innocent until proven guilty, if the governor can just sign a single decree that detains you and removes you from public life because you've been determined to be a public health risk. Where does being tried by a jury of our peers to decide our guilt or non-guilt go with the passage of this bill? Where do search warrants, legally signed by a judge, go if all it takes to remove us from public office is a decree signed by the governor or one of his deputies? But it gets even better, gang, because when A416 talks about public health risks and public health crises, it's not just talking about communicable diseases. That's what the elites in New York State want us to think. They want us to think that this bill only pertains to communicable diseases and viruses like China's coronavirus and pandemics like the one we've been living under for almost an entire year now. But that is not nearly the scope of their intentions or their ambitions. And here is Governor Cuomo to prove it.
COVID showed that racism is a public health crisis also. COVID killed black people in this country at 2 times the rate of white people, and Hispanic people at 1.5 times the rate of white people. Testing for COVID was more available in richer, whiter communities, and the infection rate was higher in black, Hispanic, and poor communities. This can't happen again, and it can't happen with this vaccine.
Consider just for a sec the scope of what Cuomo did there. He equivocated racism with a disease, when the two things are absolutely nothing alike. Racism. And by racism, I mean the old school definition of the word, where person A thinks that person B is intrinsically worth less than himself because he comes from a different country, a different ethnicity, a different tribe, etc., etc. That sort of racism is not a disease that can be spread like a cold or a flu, and which can be cured in some sort of vaccine created in a petri dish. Racism, again, the genuine evil of racism is a problem of the human heart that can only be cured through reason, rational dialogue, and imagination. It requires a turning of the heart so that people see that our intrinsic human dignity and worth isn't rooted in what tone our skin color is. Not only then is Governor Cuomo guilty of horrendously sloppy logic, in fact, it is a logical fallacy that he committed there, he did something else too. Because if racism is now a public health crisis, why can't Bill A416 be utilized against racism? There's no reason in the world why it can't be. Under the best times, as I just said, Bill A416 would be tyrannical. With that door open, it becomes downright totalitarian, because we live now in a society that believes that the mainstream culture, the foundation of the country itself, is rooted in the oppression of minority groups. And this isn't on the fringes of the left either anymore. No. This is the heart and core of the left. To give just one example, look at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is now part of the Smithsonian, FYI. In its webpage section about how you can be an anti-racist ally, the museum says, quote, "In a society that privileges white people and whiteness, racist ideas are considered normal throughout our media, culture, social systems, and institutions." The translation being that everything is racist, everything is designed to oppress black people, brown people, or anyone who is not considered part of the mainstream culture, i.e. the white, cisgendered, heterosexual man and woman. And when I say that the left believes that every single aspect of life is inundated and corrupted with systematic racism, that's not an exaggeration, gang. They honestly, truly believe this. Last year, in January of 2020, Shahamat Udin, the intersections editor of the Two-Lane Hullabaloo, wrote a piece where he said that business culture, not just businesses, but business culture, was corrupted with white supremacy and racism. He wrote, quote, "Professionalism is asking black people to not speak African American vernacular English and instead code switch to white accessible dialects. It is asking non-white people to hide their culture dress and instead purchase clothes they will only wear to interviews. It is asking applicants to speak on work experiences that were challenging instead of the ones where we had racist bosses. Western business professionalism is rooted in white supremacy. The practice of professionalism is shaped to advance the careers of white straight married men. From the minute non-white people begin their job applications to the last day at their jobs, their identities are under constant scrutiny, a scrutiny claiming to check for business professionalism, but which really inspects for the employee's adherence to whiteness. It's gotten to the point where not just commonsensical and courteous things like being on time is now declared to be racist, but also time-honored traditions of Western civilization, things that have done nothing but improve the world, such as individualization, perfectionism, objectivity, intellectualization. The things that made Western civilization great, the things that made other civilizations great when they adapted those ideas to their own cultures and their own countries, all of these now are nothing more, per the left, than manifestations of white supremacy designed solely to keep black people, brown people, whatever sort of marginalized group you claim to be part of, down in the dirt. You take that sort of environment with a bill like A416, and a whole host of terrifying questions suddenly pop up like daffodils. Will, for example, asking a black employee to speak proper English now be considered a sign of racism? Will a sign of contagious racism be someone pointing out the higher crime rates in the black community and then saying that the higher crime rates are a result of the decimation of the black family caused by leftist policies? Will it be contradicting a black office holder, whether it's face-to-face verbally or just through the letter section of the local newspaper? Will it be running against a black candidate for office? Will a sign of racism also be arguing against the totalitarian differentiation between racially black and politically black? The answer to all of these questions is yes, of course. The logic of the premises moves inevitably in that direction, and the only cure for the people who do these actions or to hold on to these beliefs that nobody had a problem with 5 seconds ago, is to remove them from public life and to reprogram them. Because as I said before earlier in this video, racism is not something that you can cure with a vaccination. It can only be cured with a turning of the heart. But the left isn't interested in turning hearts through the imagination or through actual reason. They are interested in corruption and brainwashing. Their environment is not the symposium of Socrates or Plato or Aristotle. Their natural environment is the Soviet Gulag. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, gang, but it's not just going to end at racism. A416, the mindset embedded in A416, plus the idea that systematic racism is everywhere, opens the door to everything being reclassified as a public health crisis. Everything that opposes the left and its agenda. Whether we're talking about Orthodox Christianity, whether we're talking about the nuclear family, or the biological belief that there are only two sexes. The biological reality, I should say, that there are only two sexes. All of this now is up for the guillotine and the chopping block. All of it will now be reclassified as a public health crisis that must be eradicated by the state through social reprogramming. And this means that we can kiss everything that we have held dear up to this point goodbye, from our natural rights to our system of government to the bonds of family that we have with our brothers and sisters, our children and our spouse and our parents. All of it will go out the window so that we can live in the Orwellian, Huxleyan dystopia that the left calls utopia. Utopia because they will control it. Now I have good news and bad news. Bad news is that there is no conventional way to combat this. Any hope we have of defeating A416 and all of its sister bills, which are now guaranteed to pop up all over the United States, by forming a new protest group, attending some rallies where nobody burns anything because that's very, very important, or getting some prominent guest speakers to come to tell us how insane and horrible and unconstitutional it is, they're all dead on arrival. The reason being is that it's gone too far, gang. We were complacent for too long. And I know we all got mad at the right things. We all wrote indignant posts for Facebook. We all argued with leftists on Twitter. We posed with our guns and our "These Colors Don't Run" t-shirts for Instagram. We subscribed to the right podcasts. We bought and read the right books. Maybe we even went to some conventions. Maybe we even attended some rallies. Wrote some letters for our local newspaper. And more than that, we voted. We went out and we voted in every single election that the conservative talking heads told us was the most important election of our lifetime, because this was the time when we had to stand up and defeat the radical socialist agenda. We did all that. But that's all that we did do. Because our supposedly intellectual betters told us that doing all those things and voting was all that we could do. We couldn't actually put teeth and claws into our movement. I mean, doing that was going to risk a rabid and violent backlash by the left when they inevitably gained the levers of power back. And it was also going to jeopardize our big tent movement. I mean, surely we didn't want everyone to think that we were the caricatures as portrayed by the left. No, we wanted everyone to think that we were the fun-loving, badass, rule-defying, conforming rebels. And so we stayed in our lane. We were good. All of that is the bad news. The good news is that this can all still be turned around. There is still hope. What I find most interesting about A416, if interesting is actually the right word to use in this situation, is how similar it is to the writs of assistance, which the British Parliament authorized with the Navigation Acts of 1760, which allowed officials of the Empire, the British Empire, to search ships, businesses, and even private homes simply on a whim. All it took was an official to be suspicious that so-and-so was engaged in smuggling, and he could search his ship, his business, and his home whenever he wanted, for how long he wanted. No search warrant was needed, no checks or balances, just sheer raw power. A416 is the exact same thing. And just as the writs of assistance were the first step towards the American Revolution, A416 has the power to do the same thing. But
it will take dedication, it will take time.
it will also take freeing ourselves from the modes of thinking of the past. Because this time, this year, in this new year, it's different, gang. We're not going to start another protest group. We're not going to hold another rally. We're not going to buy a new book or listen to a new podcast. We're not going to ask in faux shock if the left really wants to go where their logic dictates. We're not simply going to dismiss them out of hand as clowns and parodies of themselves, as some commenters have described them. The time for respectable and quote-unquote appropriate pushback is over. In closing up this video for this week, let me just give a quote by Winston Churchill. If you will not fight when your victory is sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may even be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as slaves. The die is cast, gang. It's our choice whether we want to cross the Rubicon or not. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. Before you go, if you could give the video a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends on social media, I would be very much obliged. And if you like this video, and if you like videos about religion, politics, and the culture from a unique POV, then subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos just like this. Videos that you are especially not going to want to miss as we head into the new year of 2021. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. Thank you for all the support you have given me, for your comments, your likes, and your shares. I appreciate everything that you guys have done. And until next week, gang, stay safe, stay free by daring to read, think, speak, and write. Chat at you later. Ciao.